If you'd like to get out a Bible, we are going to be going through the book of Jonah today in our series through some of the big, famous stories of the Old Testament, looking at how the Old Testament all points to Jesus. And today we're going to look at Jonah and see what's going on with Jonah and how Jesus was the real fulfillment of the call of Jonah. And it's an interesting story, the book of Jonah. It's kind of backwards. Anyway, the kids are here. So, kids, I'm going to need some people who are brave, hopefully. Maybe I won't get any, but if some of you are brave, you older class, I think it would be very helpful for us big people if, as we read the story, we had a few people to do some acting for us, some silent acting. So I don't know if anyone's. I see hands, so that's good. I'll call you up when it's time. Okay, we'll have a few different. I mean, that's brave. I like it. Anyway, we're going to be in the book of Jonah, and just before we start reading, yes, I have a red sermon today because there was red in the photocopier. So there we go. Keep it bright. One of the funny things about the book of Jonah is that there's a lot of different literary techniques, and we have, a certain way of reading things. We read stories a certain way in our day, but in this kind of writing, which we call Hebraic writing, there's techniques, there's literary techniques that the authors use to try and help us think, help the reader think. And I'm going to try and draw some of them out as we go, but one of the things is we're not given a lot of the thinking behind what's happening. Okay, so things happen, we see things happen, things are omitted, left out, we don't necessarily know, but that's on purpose. The author wants us to think. The author wants us to see something that's said and stop and think, why was that said, and why didn't they say this? And it's important to know that way. The other thing is this story is full of irony. And in fact, the purpose of the book is never stated. You don't ever get a point where it's like, and this is what I'm trying to tell you. It's actually all implied through irony. And kids, irony is when something is kind of backwards from what it should be. It's like completely, you'd expect it to be this way, but it actually goes the completely opposite way. And our writer is using irony to make us think carefully about what's happening. And so we are getting into the book of Jonah. Now, before we get to the book of Jonah, we only have one other thing about Jonah. And some people say, well, maybe it's not the same Jonah. It's just a coincidence that he had the same father. But it seems like it was the same Jonah. And that is in 2 Kings chapter 14, where this is all we have. This is the king, which I think is King Jeroboam. He did this. He restored the border according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, spoken through his servant, the prophet Jonah. Same dad, Amittai. Now, the interesting thing about this is actually that doesn't happen. Later, God says, you know what, I'm revoking that because you didn't go in my way. And so the only thing we have from Jonah is that he prophesied something and then God took it back. And that's who Jonah is so far. Now, I don't know what we do with that yet, but let's walk through the book of Jonah. And again, remember, the point of Jonah is always stated through irony, never explicitly stated. Now, we're going to go through 4 scenes in the book of Jonah, and I need some actors. Who's going to help me? Come on up. You can just come up. We need at least 2, 3, 4 would be great. We got 2. Anyone else brave? It doesn't have to be a kid. Okay, we'll do with 2. You might have to play. Now, here's the thing. You have no... initiation. Right on. Come on up. Now, here's the thing. We don't really have, stage directions, so you make it up as you go. Here, why don't you guys go to this side, and I move a little bit when I preach, so... Well, I guess I'm just reading, but here we go. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up. Who wants to be God? We won't. Okay. You stand up there. Just in the story. Okay. Get up. Go to the great city. You can maybe do that. Yeah. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because their evil has come up before me. Jonah got up. Who's Jonah? Two Jonahs. Okay. Jonah got up to flee Tarshish. He ran. Run. This is your chance to escape. He ran from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. You're in the ship? That's good. But the Lord threw a great wind into the sea and such a great storm. The ship came up this way on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. The sailors were afraid. I guess that means you're the sailors. And each cried to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Maybe one of the Jonahs. Yeah, that's good. Oh, you're the cargo now. Meanwhile, Jonah went down into the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish." "Come on," the sailors said to each other, "let us cast lots. Then we'll know who's to blame for this trouble we're in." So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. Everyone point to Jonah. Who's Jonah? Everyone point to Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us who's to blame for this trouble we're in. What is your business and where are you from? What is your country and what people you're from?" He answered them. Jonah, can you put your hands up like this? "I am a Hebrew. I worship Yahweh, the Lord, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were seized by great fear and said to him, "What is this you have done?" The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he told them. So they said to him, "What should we do so that the sea will calm down for us? For the sea is getting worse and worse." He answered them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea so that it will calm down for you." Wait, not yet. What's that person called who is on the side telling them that, "Oh no, don't do that"? That's me. Stage director, okay. I'm not very good, but. "What is this you've done?" Oh, we're past that. The sea was getting worse and worse. So the men rowed as hard as they could to get back to dry land, but they couldn't because the sea was raging against them more and more. So they called out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, don't let us perish because of this man's life, and don't charge us with innocent blood. For you, the Lord, have done just as you pleased." Then they picked up Jonah, figuratively, and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. The men were seized by a great fear for the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Then the Lord appointed a great fish. Are you ready now? No, that's okay. You can be the fish. A great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Thank you. We'll have our dramatic intermission now, and then we'll come back in a bit. So, interesting start to the story. What we have is this man who we know from history that we read, he was a prophet, and God tells him to do something, and if you'll notice, there's no answer. He doesn't say a thing, and he just goes. Okay, so God tells him, "Go do this," and he goes. And actually, if you looked on a map, he goes in the complete opposite direction. Right? God tells him to go here. He says, "No, I'm going this way." And he runs away. And we get this, the author inserts these little hints to show us that Jonah would rather die than do what God is asking him. So, interestingly, if you read, depending on your version, you read a few times it says, "And Jonah went down." Then it says some other things, and then Jonah went down. And then Jonah went down. And actually that phrase in Hebrew is a euphemism for dying, for death. They use that sometimes. It's kind of like if we said passed on, right? So imagine the author's writing, "And then he passed on here. And then he passed on down here in the ship. And then he went into a deep sleep." The author's giving us these little hints that Jonah would rather die. Right? He's like, I'm going down and down and down. I don't want to do what God is asking me to do. I wish I'd rather just, I'd rather die. And now we get to this point where he gets on a ship. And if you recall, we've talked about this a few times. You see it through the Bible. You see it in the New Testament. The Israelites did not have a very good view of the world. right? You know, the word Gentile, you see even in the New Testament, they talk about them as dogs, right? They weren't allowed, eventually they weren't allowed to even eat with them. You know, don't touch me, you're unclean, I'm clean. And so Israelites have this history of judging the pagans, we could call them, the outside world. You know, the kind of no good, dirty, rotten non-Israelites. And here we get even worse. I use that because, I don't think they're worse, but they would have thought they're worse reading this. They get to these sailors, right? And sailors are not clean people in this day, right? And so they're these no good, dirty, rotten, pagan pirates. And Jonah gets on this ship and kind of hides away in the bottom of the ship, like, I'm just going to sleep and run. Now, this is where our irony starts. I guess it started when the man of God ran away from God. But this is where a real contrast starts to come in. Okay, they ask, they're panicking, and we see these men who are kind of like, we don't want to die, we don't want our friends to die. Let's call out to God. Let's call out to our gods, right? They have all these gods, and let's call out to our gods and pray, and maybe there will be mercy. Maybe we'll be spared. And then Jonah comes up, right? And these guys who want to hear from God, and this prophet who won't listen to God, he comes up and they say, where are you from? Who are you? And he comes in and he says, well, I'm an Israelite, right? And the way the story's gone, you kind of get that sense like, he's saying this and it's like, I worship the Lord, right? As I run away from him, right? He's trying to like kind of build up this, I'm an oh so spiritual Israelite, and yet has no concern for life or no concern for the people he's called to. And so he's this Israelite in name, but not really in action. And then you have the pirates who are afraid, right? And so they say, call out to God. Call out to God. And Jonah says, well, after they cast lots, he said, okay, it's me. Yes, I'm the culprit. I've done what's wrong. So if you cast me over, that is, if you kill me, everything will be okay. Now think of what Jonah's been like so far, right? Descending down, descending down. I don't want to do what God's asking. This is not a noble, like, I'll sacrifice myself for the people. This is like, I don't want to live and do what God's calling me. So why don't you kill me? And it will all be right. Well, another irony, they don't want to kill him. They don't want to shed innocent blood. And so they start rowing and they start throwing stuff off because they want to get to safety. They want everyone to get to safety. They don't want this guy to perish, even though they don't even know him. And there's this contrast. Jonah not caring about the people God says are going to perish, and these pagan pirates caring about Jonah. So, in the end, they do throw him off. And when they throw him off, they say, oh God, please, we know you do whatever you want. Please don't charge us with this man's blood. Please spare us. They are reaching out to God, these pirates. And after they throw him out, they start worshiping God. They start offering to God. They start vowing to God. And Israelites should be reading this, scratching their head and saying, hold on, the man of God is ignoring God and running from God, and these pirates are worshiping God, and they're showing this fear of God. It's ironic. The spiritual man runs from God, and the dirty, rotten pirates worship God. And the question we get is, who is being more like the people of God? Who is acting more like a man of God? And I saw a hand. I know what you're going to say. You can yell it out. You want to yell it out? Who is it? The pirates, right? They're acting like the men of God. And Jonah is not. The Bible doesn't say pirates, by the way. I made that up. Just in case there was confusion. Now we get to a second scene. So that's our first scene. Jonah's thrown off, and it ends with, and God appointed, we're going to see that a lot in this book, God appointed a fish to come and swallow him. Now, in that moment, Jonah gets what he wants, right? Like, I just want to die. And he's thrown over, and it's like, yes. Except then he's not dead. He's rescued. And it's in a most probably uncomfortable way, and probably doesn't smell very good. And we find out that Jonah has a lot of time to think and reflect on what's going on. He's taken into a whale. Why don't we read that? Or a fish or a whale. And when he's in there, we get this kind of reflection. It says, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. I called to the Lord in my distress, and he answered me. I cried out for help from deep inside Sheol. You heard my voice. You threw me into the depths, into the heart of the seas, and the current overcame me. All your breakers and your billows swept over me. But I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look once more towards your holy temple. The water engulfed me up to my neck. The watery depths overcame me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. That's a funny thing. Funny detail. I sank to the foundations of the mountains of the earth. The earth's gates shut behind me forever. Then you raised my life from the pit. Lord, my God. As my life was fading away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you in your holy temple. Those who cherish worthless idols abandon their faithful love. But as for me, I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving. I will fulfill what I have vowed. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Now, reading that, it sounds a lot like a psalm. Anyone notice that? It sounds a lot like a psalm. And that's because, actually, a lot of the lines are pieces of psalms. Now, something I am inferring from the story. So, this is my speculation, okay? This is not, we don't know for sure what's going on here. We don't have his intentions. We don't know what was going on in his mind. All we have is a whole bunch of pieces of different psalms put together in a nice poem. And what it seems like to me from the context is that Jonah, wanting to just be thrown overboard, wanting to get away from the Lord, now rescued and trapped. I can't die, but I can't, really live. I'm just stuck in this in-between place and probably panicking for a while. It seems to me like Jonah just starts recounting a bunch of things. Like, they would have grown up, all Israelites grew up, I shouldn't say all, but most Israelites at the time would have had some, influence from the Psalms. And he just starts spouting off all these things like, God, you are this, and I am this, and we should worship you, and salvation belongs to the Lord, and all these things. And it's like Jonah thrown into, I thought I was going to die, and now I'm stuck in this kind of darkness and this depression. And it seems to me like he's all of a sudden comes up with oh God, I'm so sorry. Oh God, you are good, and I'm at death's door, and I rejected you. And again, we don't know his motivations, but it seems like to me that he's thrown out. He doesn't die, and he's like, I want out. I don't want that. I want to be rescued. I want mercy. And so, again, we get this kind of irony, right? God asked him to do something, and he wouldn't do it, and now when he's stuck, he's like, oh God, you're the best. Right? And I'm so terrible. His tune changes. Interestingly, we don't get any response from God. There's no words. God doesn't say anything back to that. We just see that God appoints a fish to spit him out. It actually says vomit him out, which may give an indication as to, what is going on in the fish. Like, just get out, right? Just go on the land. And so God now appointing things again to get his purposes to come about. God involved in the little details. And the man of God comes out of that darkness and depression and is sent on his way. Now we get to scene 3. Do I have some more actors? You've come on up. You just run up. I need a few this time, and some don't even have to say anything. Good. Same 3. The faithful. Okay. The word of the Lord, I'll be the word of the Lord this time. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach the message that I tell you. Jonah got up and went to Nineveh according to the Lord's command. Now Nineveh was an extremely great city. We're going to need 2 non-Jonahs and 1 Jonah this time. Okay. Rock, paper, scissors. Oh, okay. Okay, so Jonah comes into this great city and proclaimed. Can you read it up there? Oh, it's not there yet. There we go. He proclaimed in 40 days. In 40 days, you just mouth it, I'll say it. In 40 days, Nineveh will be demolished. Then the people of Nineveh believed God. You're the people of Nineveh. Both of you, yeah. They believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and they dressed in sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. When the word reached the king of Nineveh, he got up from his throne, he took off his royal robe, he put on sackcloth, and he sat in ashes. Maybe you could kneel down and look all sad. Then he issued a decree in Nineveh. By order of the king and his nobles, no person or animal, herd or flock, is to taste anything at all. They must not eat or drink water. Furthermore, both people and animals must be covered with sackcloth, and everyone must call out earnestly to God. Each must turn from his evil ways and his wrongdoing. Who knows? God may turn and relent. He may turn from his burning anger so that we will not perish. And God saw their actions, that they had turned from their evil ways. So God relented from the disaster he had threatened them with, and he did not do it. So you guys can run off happy, and you can run off sad, Jonah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So some more ironic things in this part. Look at the summary of what Jonah says, okay? God had told him in the beginning, we know God said, what are the specific words? Basically he says, go and preach against Nineveh, right? Because their evil has come up before me. So that's all we know. And Jonah comes and says this. A very detailed and helpful and hope-filled speech. He says, in 40 days Nineveh will be demolished. That's all we have. In 40 days Nineveh will be demolished. He doesn't say anything about God in that. He doesn't give any hope. And we know already he didn't really want them to be rescued, right? Now, interesting. And this is kind of funny, I think. Interestingly, that word demolished, I usually like the CSB, but it's not the best translation because, in this instance, because that word in Hebrew actually means turned over, right? And I mean, when you're talking about a city, you could assume it means demolished. But the word actually means turned over, turned on its head, reversed course even, it's used like that in the Bible, or even transformed. But it can mean demolished. So Jonah's going around and saying, you know, your city's going to be turned over. And what happens when Jonah's crying out against Nineveh? Well, it says, they believed God. The people believed God. And again, we don't have the details of how that happened. We don't have the details of did Jonah say it was God? Or did they just know he was an Israelite? We don't know that. All we know is Jonah comes in and says, oh, your city's going to be destroyed. And these people believe God. And now it's interesting. First, we see the people. Okay, the people say, we're going into sackcloth, we're fasting. Then it comes to the king, and the king says, yes, we're all doing this. We're all fasting. Even the animals, the people believed God. And the king, I don't want our people to perish, he says. I don't want this great city to perish. Maybe God will turn away. And it says, they turned. And so God turned. Now, big irony here. The man of God doesn't care about these people. The man of God didn't want these people to be spared. And here are the Ninevites, which they are enemies in Israel many times. These Ninevites, they cared. We don't want to perish. We don't want our city to perish. The king, I don't want my people to perish. And so they worship God. They're humble before God. They lay themselves down and turn away from their wrong into the right. So you have this story now where the man of God, called by God, turns away from what God asks him to do. And you have these people, the enemies of God, turning to what God would have them do. And even more, you have this irony where Jonah walking in saying, your city's going to be overthrown. Your city's going to be overturned. And the city is overturned. But not how Jonah wanted it. The city is completely turned around from their evil into worship of God. They reversed course. And I don't understand how Jonah doesn't see this irony. But the whole point of the story is being told through that irony. It's that question. How can this man of God turn from what God calls them. And these people, these Israel-hating Ninevites, these pagans who don't know God, they're turning from the wrong way to the right way. They're turning from stubbornness to submission. And the man of God is doing the complete opposite. And so that same question comes. Who is looking like the people of God here? Who's looking like the people of God? And we get to our last scene. Scene 4. Which is chapter 4. And it's the aftermath. Or we could say it's suicidal gardening. Jonah was greatly displeased, and he became furious. He prayed to the Lord, "Please, Lord, isn't this what I thought while I was still in my own country? That's why I ran away. That's why I fled toward Tarshish in the first place. I knew that you," it's funny how he says this as an accusation, "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love, one who relents from sending disaster. And now, Lord, take my life from me, for it's better for me to die than to live." The Lord asked, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Jonah left the city and found a place east of it. He made himself a shelter there and sat in its shade to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God appointed a plant, and it grew over Jonah to provide some shade for his head to rescue him from trouble. Jonah was greatly pleased with the plant. When dawn came the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, and it withered. As the sun was rising, God appointed a scorching east wind. The sun beat down on Jonah's head so much that he almost fainted, and he wanted to die. He said, "It's better for me to die than to live." And God asked Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "Yes, it's right," he replied. "I'm angry enough to die." So the Lord said, "You cared about the plant, which you didn't labor over and did not grow. It appeared in a night and perished in a night. But may I not care about the great city of Nineveh, which has more than 120,000 people who cannot distinguish between their right hand and their left, as well as many animals?" In this last scene, which ends abruptly, as you can see, we see Jonah's heart in this. First of all, he uses God's name, right? If you remember, that's when God showed himself to Moses. That phrase about slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, that was how God described himself. So that's like if you want a sentence of what God's like, that's it. And Jonah comes in and says, "See, God, I knew you were this," right? And he's like using it as an accusation to God. And he said, "I would rather die than see these people rescued." Now God, who is slow to anger apparently, because most of us would not be dealing with selfish, obstinate Jonah right now, but God uses something to give him an object lesson. God appoints this little mercy, this little type of deliverance, this comfort. This plant comes up and gives him some shade, and Jonah's happy. Jonah really likes the plant. And as he sits there waiting to see if, maybe the city will be destroyed, waiting to see what happens, right? He's like sitting there under his plant. He's like, I love this rescue. I love this mercy. This is so good. And then God takes it away, right? And Jonah, I don't know what kind of person he was, but he has this like mini disaster, right? Like, my plant's gone. I want to die. You took away my plant. How could you, this is my paraphrase, how could you let something perish? God, how could you let something perish like this? How could you let that die? This plant, my precious plant. Right? And the irony is, like, Jonah is caring so much about this bunch of leaves. And he's upset that this bunch of leaves has died. And his comfort is, his little bit of mercy is gone. And he still won't care about these people who God calls him to care about. Really, Jonah is being like the opposite of God here. God is showing mercy to these enemies of the people of Israel. And Jonah won't even give them the time of day more than a plant. And the book ends with a question. There's no resolution. We don't get an answer. The book just ends with this question. God says, you cared about the plant, but you did not labor over it, did not grow. It appeared in the night, and it perished in the night. But may I not care about that great city of Nineveh, which has more than 120,000 people who cannot distinguish between their right hand and their left, as well as many animals? And what that means, right hand and left, that means they have no concept of God's way. Right? They can't tell this way from that. They don't have the law of God. And God is showing them mercy. And so God asks the question. And we can finish with that same question we've been asking. What do the people of God look like here? What does it look like to be a person of God? And it's not Jonah. What should a true representative of God look like? When someone is called by God to go on a mission, right? This is a rescue mission. God says that, go preach against Nineveh. They're evil, knowing they're going to turn, right? God knows that. But he's sending them on a mission. What does the person look like? Well, not like Jonah. That's what the book's telling us. Not like Jonah. That's not what someone looks like. Jonah is the opposite. So the person of God doesn't look like disobedience and running away. The person of God looks like obedience and running toward. Doesn't look like, I don't care about those people that God wants saved. It looks like I want to care. I want to love. I want to show them God's mercy and compassion. Jonah was, in a sense, this failed example, this ironic and backwards example of what it is to be called by God. But later, God would show us what it looks like to be a person called of God, right? God would come as Jonah came. God would call his son to go and rescue the enemies of God. Right? The Bible calls the world, in a sense, we were at enmity with God, right? We had opposed God. We had become the enemies of God. And Jesus came, called by God, obeying God, going to his enemies to preach the good news, to let them know about God's mercy and compassion, and to tell them to turn away. In a way, Jesus did what Jonah did, but the opposite. He was sent to his enemies, and he came, and we see Jesus' heart again and again. He desires that they would turn and come back. He desires that they would be rescued. And we see Jesus, showing the heart of God, coming to Israel, who again was very enclosed, and we want just to be us, and they don't, they're not a part of it. Jesus came, and he was again and again saying, there's more. It's not just us. I've come for the world. I've come to spread the mercy of God to the world. And Jesus was ridiculed again and again for caring for people that they thought, you shouldn't care for those people. You shouldn't talk to those Gentiles. You shouldn't sit with them. You shouldn't go to that woman who's, a woman of the city. And Jesus was ridiculed for being the opposite of Jonah, which is coming to his enemies and bringing love and mercy and blessing. And so the irony of the book of Jonah is that we need to apply the opposite of what the main character applies. We see God wants to rescue those who are his enemies, those who have opposed God, those who don't care for God. God wants to rescue them. God was going to show mercy. And so to truly obey the call of God means taking up that same mantle, going to those who are not like us, and bringing the message of God's mercy and God's compassion. Spreading his love. That's how we've put it in our church. Spreading the love of Jesus to the Columbia Valley. Caring for others as God would care for them. And so this is what we're called to. That's our mission as the people of God. Jonah gives us the irony, the opposite way. But we are called to go even when we think, well, maybe, I don't think they deserve it. I don't like them. They're not nice. They don't look like church people. We're called to go. We're called to share God's love with them. And this calling is both as a church family and as individuals. And that's kind of a weird dynamic, right? Sometimes we think, well, the church will do all that stuff, and I'll just go to church stuff, right? I'll go to church programs, and the church will show me and put me in places. And we want to do those things. Those are good things, right? However, thinking of ways to do things as a group is not what it means to be an ambassador for Jesus. More so, we are called as individuals to represent him wherever we go. That means we're a family of parts, right? We're a family of members. And each of us is called to be that voice wherever we are. To be that voice at our work, to be that voice when we're, doing recreational activities, to be that voice when we, meet someone and we're building a relationship, they don't know the Lord. We're called to be those who carry that love. Everyone. And all of us have different gifts, and all of us have different relationships, and all of us have different lives. But we are called to be the love of God wherever we go. Not run away from that, not hide away from that, not think, well, they shouldn't get it. They've gone too far. Jonah shows us no one's gone too far. God wants to rescue. And can the church mess that up? Totally. We could be like Jonah all the time, right? Selfish. We could say, I don't want to talk to those people. I don't want to get involved with that. We can hide away, right? Or we can even be poor representatives, or like Jonah, the message is just a little piece of the message, and in fact, the piece that's meanest to the people, right? That happens. It does happen. But listen, God still used Jonah. Another thing kind of secondary is that from this book is that God still used Jonah. So we don't need to think, well, what if I mess it up? I don't think I can do this. God called someone, and there's a lot of runaround to get Jonah to do what he's asked to do. But God still uses him. And some people say, well, why the church? Right? Why? Like the church is just messy and ugly at times, and, no comment on the look of the people here, but I mean, what the church does sometimes in history has been messy and ugly. And we've done, as a church in history, there have just been flaws and blemishes. But God still uses the church. God still uses the people he's called. And instead of, it looking like, we just go and do what we're told, a lot of the times it's God appointing things. This thing here and this event in your life and this difficulty and this joy. And God appoints these things, organizing our lives to shape us and to form us and to lead us into those people, lead us to be those people who do what he says, to answer his call. And there are risks, right? The risks of losing your comforts, the risk of having to love and serve people that we don't really like, or people we don't, want to be around. And, it's kind of sad that there is a history in the church where there are people in different periods of church history where it was like, those people now, they don't really need it. We can go to these people that we're comfortable with, but this group, whatever it was at different times, slaves, right? At different times, indigenous people. Maybe in our day, it's the different, like the LGBTQ community and different things where we're kind of scared, like, I don't know how to interact with that. I don't know what to do as a church person. They're always telling me that I'm hateful and I don't get it. Maybe that's a risk of obeying our call, is being sent to people we're uncomfortable talking to. And the questions that arise from the book of Jonah should arise for us too. One of those questions could be, are the outsiders going to be more responsive than God's people? Right? In the whole story, the outsiders are more responsive to God than Jonah. And that's not good, right? We look at that and we say, oh, Jonah, come on. Is that going to happen in our day? Right? Like God is doing things in all different places in the world, and sometimes the church is like, oh, I don't really want to touch that. Are we going to be responsive? And the other question is, are you comfortable with the idea that God is going to rescue people that you may not see as deserving? God is going to rescue people that we might look at and say, oh, they're the kind of enemies of the church. God is going to do work in those people groups. And God is going to rescue people from all different places. And to this we are called, not to run and hide like Jonah, but to push forward and engage and take risks like Jesus.